All right. So welcome all to the first class in the series of Astrology for Witches. And you know I all love alliteration. So metaphysical matter making. How do we take the metaphysical celestial into our matter, into our being, and then choose to make from that knowledge that comes through and from the questions that we ask so we know what to do, right? So my intention for tonight's class is going to be talking a lot about associations, celestial associations, how things are kind of packaged matryoshka, Russian style doll ways, as I always love going in that direction. And then also some practical magic making, because you all know I love giving you practical tools to act upon right away and just feel intuitively like, ooh, let's try this with some spell making, or maybe this with witch PE and a little bit of herbalism, right? And just giving it a try. We'll talk a little bit about aspects and degrees, which that could be a whole class in itself, but I'm going to give you some really tangible cheat sheet tools. So when you cast your chart, you can have a look and be like, oh, this is what a square is. This is what a stellium is. This is what, oh, that's what conjunction and sextile mean. Okay. And it's all, I wish this was taught in school because it's all geometry and math. And imagine if they taught us, right, but in the context of the poetry of the stars to learn geometry, I would have like signed up for that class right away. But that's just me. We're going to talk a little bit about retrogrades, eclipses, and just some other celestial events. And if there are other questions of things that come up, feel free to drop them in the chat. Just because it is a lot in pop culture being talked about retrogrades, and then fears around retrogrades, fears around eclipses. And I think I may be giving you all a scientific, but also a poetic metaphor for how I look at retrogrades so that they may seem a little bit less scary. Take with that as, if it resonates, take it. If not, toss it. You know the drill. And then a little bit about some witching hours and seasons. Just kind of sitting with, oh, when are some good times? What are some good days to engage in manifestation? When's a good time to rest? When's a good time to receive? Kind of a little bit of tarot connection there too, with personal archetypes and stories. So with that, let me just double check the chat. Love Astro. Yes, my Montessori school wants me to teach some students via Astro. Yes, please. Geometry and astrology. Maybe then I would have loved math. Imagine, right? To some elementary students. Oh, keep us posted for sure. So first things first, here's your cheat sheet. Wanted just to give you guys this big lay of the land. I love to look at the big picture of how things fit in, and this will also be available in the library. And it's actually inspired by the Hygge astrologer, so Hygge astrologer, that came up with these really great cheat sheets. And if there are more, I think they also offer a couple more different cheat sheets as well. So that's kind of a really nice lay of the land for the fire, water, earth, and air. There's also all of the symbols that you'll see typically if you are casting a chart for yourself or for somebody. And then you also will get what are some of the adjectives or associations to these elements. So for fire, passionate, enthusiastic, temperamental, spontaneous; water, sensitive, mysterious, imaginative, emotional; earth's practical, loyal, grounded, and reliable; air is social, observant, creative, and adventurous, right? And then thinking again of the dolls, if we had 4 different dolls of the elements, we also have 3 dolls where these 4 came from that are cardinal, fixed, and mutable. You may be familiar with these terms, but cardinal are very much like the starters, the leaders, dynamic initiators, action-oriented, direct, and assertive. Fixed, think of it as the cardinal gave the tools and was like, okay, build this. And then the fixed sign is like, all right, here's the lay of the land. We're still in building mode. we got to stick to the plan. That's fixed kind of energy. That's resistant to change, determined, great willpower, stable, reliable, and flexible. And I know a lot of people be like, oh, well, you need to be flexible. It's like, there are seasons for all of these emotions. There are seasons for all of these types of cardinal ways of being, fixed ways of being, and mutable ways of being, which is so great, which gets into a really great question that the Eckharts brought to me that we'll dive into a little later. And then mutable, the final one, this is the flexible, adaptable, communicative, changeable, resourceful. And you'll see here the different symbols again for the signs. And it may take a little while to get familiar with these symbols. I like to draw them out to just practice them. And even when I'm doing my own chart, for those of you that are in the Bujo Witch group, one of the things we did was kind of putting our chart together and then practicing putting the different symbols on the chart. So it's a good way of learning that, but also no shame in using references for the symbols, because it is a lot of information. And I occasionally, even doing professional readings, will occasionally have my cheat sheets available too, to make things easier and quick for me as well. Then we have our planets and our ruling signs. So these are a couple more dolls that are coming from kind of, we're breaking it down from the fire, water, earth, and air. And then also the houses, which is a whole other kind of bigger thing to hold on to within the planets. But just to go through a couple of them here, we have sun, which is more ego, identity, and personality. And think of it too as these are like generalizations. And I would really inspire or kind of put this little seed in making your own definitions from these as they occur for you. And this doesn't mean like, oh, okay, sun is going to be emotions. It's not that. It's looking at ego, identity, and personality. And what is the word that resonates with you the most? For me, it's calling. And I'll explain that in a few minutes. So for me, when I think of sun, I think of calling. When I think of moon, I think of emotions. When I think of Mercury, communication. And the quicker like these one word kind of things or associations we can put in with the planets, the easier it becomes to kind of immerse yourself in the world of astrology. But I'll share a little bit more on some other associations that might be helpful, because I know narrative works really well also with understanding and integrating all the information. So we also have the houses here, and the houses are kind of where the planets are living. We have a 360-degree circle in the time of your birth and looking kind of upwards. And there are going to be 30-degree houses where the sky is broken up into. We have the 1st through the 12th house. And these are also associated with the 12 zodiac signs. The 12 zodiac signs also are best friends with certain planets, or they're in their domicile, they're in their home, right? So that's one way to look at it. But the 1st house you see is persona, identity, physical body. 2 is about finances and security. 3 is communication and siblings. 4, home, family, and past, etc., etc. So just like with the planets, connect with the word that really resonates with you, and you can fill in your own chart here, because that's the way that you can start making these connections more regularly. So you're not always like, oh, what's the 4th house? What's this house? Which totally fine if that's going to be happening. It's a lot of information. So I just want to give that, give that grace as we're all learning about it. And then here on the bottom, you'll see some kind of, they're not in the main conversation of most charts, like with the planets. There are other type of elements of the planet. So many of you may have heard of your ascendant or your rising, and that's having to do with appearance or first type of impression, you in this physical body, right? And that sometimes is even bigger than your sun sign. Everyone's like, what's your sign? And I'm like, oh, that's a whole, it's like me, somebody asking like, what's your personality and your whole life story? I'm like, we cannot condense it into this one little thing. So when people saying, oh, well, I'm a Taurus or I'm a Sagittarius, it's like, that's giving me some information, but there's a whole bunch more that's underneath there. So when people in pop culture are saying like, oh, well, Absolutely, that's what you are. It's like, well, do you know me though? Right. So also here we have your MC, and that's life purpose. So for those of you looking like for career or direction or calling, this goes back to my sun kind of interpretation. That's another really great place to look in the chart to see that. Your north node, this is your potential, or for anybody that's gotten a reading with me, and you know that I talk about your cheat code in this lifetime. And that's the energy of that planet, the energy of that zodiac sign. Of anytime we engage in that type of cardinal, fixed, mutable, or fire, water, earth, air energy, activity, thought form, that's a cheat code. Get to the next level of this lifetime on your path, on your calling. Excuse me. And then we have our descendant. This is quality you like in others. I also kind of, in the opposite way of the ascendant here, is compliments, ascendant, descendant, opposites in those ways. The IC, this is the home and the family and the foundation. So this may be a really good thing to also look at within your fourth house here. Fourth is home, family, and past. This goes into, again, how deep do we want to go? Like, here's the main theme of my fourth house. Here's the planet that's in my fourth house. Here's the ruler that's of my fourth house. What's my IC have to say about this? Are there conjunctions and sextiles? How deep do we want to go, right? And this is a really great thing too, of when you cast your chart, you have your chart in front of you. If you want to focus on just your first house for a week and do some studies about that, if that's something that is really important to you, and this has to do with, if we go back here, ego, identity, personality, persona, identity, physical body, right? Like, that's something that I'm really working on, of how am I presenting myself? What is my relationship to myself? And then seeing what is going on in that chart, using the energies there. That's going back to, what are the good questions that we can ask? And then we have our Chiron. Chiron. This is the wounded healer in our chart. So this could be from past life situations. This could also be from growing up, certain elements of ways we spoke up and it wasn't heard, or intergenerational things that may have been passed that need to be healed in this lifetime. Having a look at that is really, really interesting. And knowing, again, like, where, in what house is it in? What house is the ruler of that? Is it in its domicile? Is it in its non-domicile? Right. And then finally here, because I just wanted to go through this pretty quick for you all. And if there are questions that pop up, feel free to drop them in the chat. Our South Node, this is past and inborn abilities. This is also for those of you that are more interested in kind of past life or intergenerational things, things that I've already kind of mastered in a previous life, or I've already been through in a past life. So I don't need to engage with this as much. It's kind of innate. And this is where the North Node then goes into, okay, in this lifetime, for me to evolve, to ascend, to heal, I engage in this type of activity, because I can, South Node Gemini here, North Node Sagittarius for me. If I engage in teaching, if I engage in putting the mark, right? If I engage in fire, that's growth for me. If I engage in Gemini, of the overthinking, the philosophizing, the intellectualizing, I stay stuck, and I love staying in there. I can stay there all day. However, engaging in North Node is putting the philosophy into action. That's just Sag North Node, South Node, Gemini South Node as an example. You see some stuff coming in the chat. Oh, Mariah, maybe then I would have loved math. Yes, to geometry and astrology in school. If there's time, can you talk about node reversal, like what to expect during it and how often it happens? Yes, I'll make a note of that so I don't forget, because I almost feel like that's bigger than the Saturn return for folks. Because it's almost like this moment of just kind of a quick thing for that question. Is you're finally able to recognize the past life self, or the inherent worth of a certain type of behavior or way of being the South Node gave you. And that the North Node then is like, oh, I see why it's important to engage in the North Node type of activities. That's my very brief summary of that. But very great question. I put a note in that one. Danny mentioning houses always trip me up. Yep, houses, I always tell folks, if you want to have your chart open and then just have a look at the first chart and put as many adjectives as you can there, looking at your, like, get really personal with your chart, get really personal with the house in that particular way. And in one way that, like, be selfish with this. I'm going to put that invitation out there of what is it that I need support with right now, and looking at the houses and saying, oh, maybe it's health and body, maybe it's job, maybe it's death transformation, joint resources, groups, friends, and luck, right? Which one is the one that I want to maybe have a look at and dive deeper into? Then you can go deep into the degrees and all of the as deep as you want to go, right? But yes, houses have a lot to them. So it's totally understandable. I love how only my ascendant is Earth. Everything else is water and fire, yet people see me as Virgo Earth. I mean, that's ascendant case study right there. They're like, hello, Virgo. And then, yeah, oh, and yours is in reverse. Oh, interesting. So you're Gemini, North Node, and then Sag, South Node. So engage in the intellectualizing philosophy, duality, dialectic universe, Danny. And Mariah, I have my North in Scorpio and South in Taurus. Ooh, okay. I'm in my nodal reversal on top of eclipse in Taurus. Talk about a scorpionic situation, Mariah. It's like, let's really unearth the shadow in this season. But this is like high magic alchemy that's occurring right now. Even if it's really, I know a lot of people are in the goop and the mud right now. I think it's still really good. I'll share when we get to eclipses how I like to talk about them. Let's see. Yes, and Danny sending all the love. Ready for my rebirth. Honestly, though, yes. I think when we get to eclipses, Mariah, there might be some, not necessarily relief, but some affirmation. Yeah. I also dropped this one here, Danny, as you mentioned, kind of trouble with the houses. Again, more words to choose from. And this is actually from one of my astrology teachers, Kelsey Rose, who's really great. She's always dropping info about human design and astrology, how all of these different intersections come together in occult circles. And so here, right, if it's helpful to print it out and circle or highlight some of the words that really resonate with you, and then drawing your own circle and be like, this is the first house, self, first impressions. 2 is money. 3 is early education and how I think, right? Like early, think of the Fool's Journey, early mother, father, emperor, empress type of energy, right? If it's helpful to even look at the tarot in that way as this journey, feel free to do that. That brings up some really interesting archetypal snapshots of where we're at astrologically and also mentally, physically, spiritually. But these are the little cheat sheets that are available for you in class, even after lecture today. And I'm excited to see how you all use them in your book of shadows or otherwise. So I promised practical magic making. And you all know I love the astro rhythm. And for those of you that kind of printed out your astro rhythm, where you have it for you, this is a perfect, another kind of addition or layer to playing with your manifestations, with your meditations, with spell making, however it is that you're engaging in your practice, to use the energies that are already there and really abundant. Like this is, imagine I forgot what class we were in where I went really far with my metaphor about the garden. This is the one where there's super fertile ground for these particular spells, desires, manifestations. And when we bring that awareness in of like, here, the energy is already fertile, let's use it, it becomes easier. It doesn't feel like so much of a trudge, right? So here we have Sunday. This is your sun sign. And these are kind of my associations also to the different planets. So sun, career or calling. This is sometimes even like the greater calling beyond career, or kind of soul, divine purpose type of manifestations, reflections, spell making. Monday, or I like to call it your moon day, is your emotional well-being or the intuitive kind of spell making. Or for those of you that are maybe interested in developing psychic abilities, intuition, opening up yourself to more of that communication. Mercury is also a good day for that too, because communication. But moon days, Mondays, really good for ancestral work, especially if there's something really emotionally charged. If there's anything around grief, Mondays are always a really good time for that, because that's more of the emotional body. And looking at your Monday or your moon sign and how you want to engage with that, like mine's a Leo moon, like, ooh, okay, fire, I'm going to engage in a performative type of maybe high magic ritual, or maybe I'm going to do something creative and art make. Maybe I'm going to do some journaling and see emotionally where I'm at, because Leo is very much on the outside or externalizing. So I need to go inward to equalize how much I externalize, right? So that's dependent again on your moon sign. Tuesday is associated with Mars, or your Mars sign. This is a really great day for working on anything with arguments, conflicts, and work, anything that's also output. Mars is associated with God of War, right? Fire. My Mars is in Cancer, so it's in its detriment. So very much showing up as passive aggressiveness rather than like full on war. But Mars in Cancer for me, if there's an argument or there's something within a community and I need some extra support around that, or like standing up or needing to be more in my sovereignty, Mars or Tuesday is a really fabulous day or fertile day to use the energy for going to war in a different way. And sometimes energetically things just align in a certain way and I didn't even have to fight or argue, right? Then we have our Wednesday. For those of you fans of Hermes and Mercury, it's our favorite day. This is communication, contracts. This is also about thoughts or speech, the way that we think. And if there has been maybe even internal dialogue that hasn't been as kind, right? This is a really great day to challenge that, or to have even some candle magic around certain words that we tell ourselves, certain language that we let ourselves hear or kind of internalize. And what is the new type of thought, or what is the new type of thinking that we want to bring into our lives, and being open to whatever that may be. And how this may work too is if Monday or your moon sign, you did some work around this kind of the emotional things that are happening for you, there may be some intuitive nudges to lean on. And then when Mercury comes around, you use that momentum from the moon day into the Mercury Wednesday to help with really transforming the way of thinking. And this goes back to like really being intentional with the time, with the knowledge, with the energies that be, right? Then we have our Thursday, our Jupiter sign. This is a fabulous day for luck spells, also great for expansion. Jupiter is the biggest planet, so has a big gravitational pull towards it. So anything that you really want to magnetize, attract, bring towards you energetically, Jupiter Thursday, fabulous day to engage with that. And it may be curious also to look at what your Jupiter sign is and see, ooh, how can I engage in that type of energy today? And even if it's, we've talked about this with like, there's going to be busy witch seasons, there's going to be high magic seasons, right? So what's one little thing I can do to engage with Jupiter if I'm like in a super busy season of my life? And if there's something hardcore and you're like, this has been bothering me for a while, and I really want to shift this or shake it out, or I want to really bring this towards me. All right, let's bring out the big high magic tools on a Thursday to attract. I know for me, Jupiter's in Libra. So anytime I organize the space or make things pretty or balance out the week, like if I wasn't sleeping enough the first half of the week, usually when Thursday rolls around, I'm sleeping more. I'm like, why am I so tired? Oh, it's a Libra day for me, right? Thursday, like we're balancing things out. So be curious about how that shows up for you. Friday, we have our Venus sign day. This is fabulous for relationship and love spells, for those of you that want to engage with that. Also for maintaining and sustaining. I love Venus sign or like Fridays for even gratitude spells, especially after Jupiter, because Jupiter's like, okay, we've expanded, we've magnetized, let's bring in the gratitude, being like, it's already done, it's already complete, we've already understood. And this is relationship to self, relationship to others, right? So let that definition be expansive for you too. And then Saturn, our Saturday, excuse me. This is our structure, our work, our time spells. If we're feeling like we don't have enough time, let's ask Saturn for some support on Saturday. Let's put a spell out there for expanding time. If we have kind of fallen off our own kind of practices, Saturday is a really awesome day for resetting and calling in more of that extra support, that discipline, ancestral support, community support, announcing things on Saturday. Always a really, really good way to do it. And of course, some spells are going to be private, and that's between you and whoever you're working with. So however that feels right for you, but I will say, since Saturn in mainstream culture has such a reputation of the Saturn return being really scary, it's a really good one if there are announcements or things, or if you're wanting accountability to share with your coven, to share with your close people so that they know, like, this is a spell that I've put into motion, just letting you know. Let me catch up here with the chat. Oh, good, Jen. Yeah, charts and breakdowns, making it super practical so that we can start using the tools right away. So this is the question that actually the Eckhart's posed, which I thought was really great, and I think a very valid one, of do the celestial bodies make a difference and affect us, or are we just engaging in confirmation bias, right? Like chicken or egg? Is it the planets that are influencing us? Is it us that we know this information, so we're projecting it off into the heavens? And I'm going to give you the most non-answer answer of both. We're part of nature and we're made of star stuff. So that is already inherently within us. Also, thinking about the history of astrology, and that's also intergenerationally within us, is our ancestors looked to the heavens to make sense of the world. And they lived more cyclically, especially during agrarian times, right? And during hunter-gatherer times. We knew that when certain celestial bodies, certain parts of the zodiac, part of the sky in a certain season, certain things would be happening. Certain seasons would occur, certain things would be planted, certain things wouldn't. Also, there were many more connections to the myth and lore back then too, and we relied more on the myth and lore, and we understood, or we had this agreed understanding of what the myths meant to us personally, which is why we're having this resurgence also in occult circles of working with different parts of the pantheon. For some folks, that works really well for them. And for others, it's like, I'm still trying to figure out all the logistics of this. And wherever you're at is totally fine. But I did want to give this context of astrology, of it's inherently, we're made of star stuff. We can't escape it, right? We're part of that. And also the projections and the myths and the stories that ancestors have passed on into the skies, into the heavens. Those are narratives that have just passed through time. And that's a fabulous way of looking at astrology, of these collective narratives that continue to keep going on and on and on. Like, there's something there, right? And you can resonate with some of the narrative. You can connect more with your own ancestral lineage to see what are some of the narratives that are mirrored here, or they might be a little bit different. And that's where we have that openness to interpretation, to the different planets, to the different pantheons. Because of course, we didn't always have the moon as the moon and Mercury as Mercury. They had different iterations and different names over time. And that's a whole class that we will get into, from all of the different dramas of the different gods and how we got to the different planets. That adds just so much more depth to the stories and the associations that we have to the planets today. So I just wanted to put that out there, that they're playing both confirmation biases and collective unconscious projections. They're playing both at the same time. And what may be helpful is when we have the understanding of different celestial events happening, like we'll be talking about retrogrades, is okay, maybe collectively we may be freaking out about retrogrades, maybe we're freaking out about eclipses, or we're feeling collectively more tired, or whatever it may be. Be like, okay, that's going to be happening. Knowing this information, how can I support myself? How can I lean into this energy versus resisting it, right? And it's still going to be maybe a little hard, or you're going to notice like more headaches or different kind of symptoms, especially for people that are more highly sensitive. And that's okay. And you're like, okay, this is to be expected. How can I support myself, right? So, excuse me, retrograde, so spooky, so scary, right? Oh, and I don't want to miss a chat. Oh yes, yeah, Anna Christina, Venus and Besiegement experience, right? Absolutely. And I loved Shahir dropped some really great thoughts on the Venus and Besiegement in the Great Hall. So shout out to Shahir, bringing that to awareness for everybody. So retrogrades, typically planets shift slightly eastward from night to night, and from time to time, from our vantage point on Earth, they seem to be changing direction. So if you were to have your astronomy telescope and you're charting the planets like we used to do years and years ago, all of a sudden you'll start noticing that one of the planets, instead of going one way, it looks like it's maybe going a little bit backwards. And you're like, are they going backwards? So retro meaning back, retrograde, right? So we're seeing this, what is actually an illusion from our perspective of how the planets are moving, because we're also spinning. Everybody's spinning all at the same time within the cosmos. And I did want to say this, that all planets retrograde. So it's not just Mercury that gets the hot seat. But with knowing that, or kind of just putting that in awareness, that retrogrades are illusions from our vantage point, just let that simmer for a little bit and see how that lands when people are talking about different retrogrades. Like, here's this illusion of, it looks like it's going backwards. However, they're still always moving forwards. Just our perspective looks like it's a little different. So to give some context and to get to know the planets a little bit more, a little better, and to kind of bring again more of the layers and the nuance, thinking about the retrograde context too. Sun illuminates the solar system. This is a fact, right? Can we take a meaning from that? Absolutely, right? Calling, putting light on all other aspects of the chart. also considered a North Star in some cultures, or this very important star in the sky. It's in its domicile, or it's in its happiest in the sign of Leo. And it's also associated with the first house. So the first house, for those of you that are wanting to dive deeper into the houses, it may be a really great place to start in the first house and see how the sun is showing up for you and lighting up the rest of your chart, right? Because it's looking through the lens of the sun, right? So for me as a Sag, I'm going to be looking through all of my houses through the lens of a Sagittarius. It's like teacher, focus, efficient, but also comedic, because we're going to make it light. So that's how Sag is. And thinking of that, right? That's what I mean when you get a reading from a Taurus or a Virgo or a Cancer. It's going to be different. It'll be the same flavors, but it'll be a different spice. So then we have our moon. And the moon is very interesting because it's not in line with the other planets of the solar system. It's very much in relation to Earth. And how I like to think of Earth is our physical body. And again, our vantage point. We have limitations from our vantage point and also amazing views from our vantage point. But the moon is the closest little support that the Earth has. And the moon, it's cyclical. It's sometimes hidden from us, but it's always present. It's associated with Cancer, and it's associated with the fourth house. And the moon has some, just historically, from an anthropology perspective, such importance, especially for folks with uteruses, which is really, really interesting. And all of the myths and lore that come from that. And the moon, again, very BFF with the Earth. We then have Mercury, again, going back to communication. It's also the closest planet to the sun. So thinking about that, right? Here's the calling, here's the illumination, and then here's Mercury that is right next to it. And Mercury is about communicating that truth, that vision of the calling, of the illumination. So it works so beautifully in that way. And this is just from looking at the order of the planets. So thinking about that as your meaning making when you're reading your chart, it's also another really great tool to connect. And of course, connected to Hermes, Mercury, communication, and also connected to Virgo with order and organizing, which makes a lot of sense. Like, how do we synthesize this huge sun truth? And Mercury isn't it's not a big planet. It's really small, but it's like synthesized. And thinking about these in the context of retrogrades, right? Could there be an illusion of non-truth or a misinterpretation of the truth through the sun, through miscommunication, right? This is where we start getting those retrograde meanings coming through. And we have our Venus. This is, again, relationships, beauty. It's also between Mercury and the Earth, which is really interesting. So Earth, I think, again, of the physical body. Moon is the body of the Earth. It's the emotional body of the physical body of humans, right? And then between that, we have communication, and then we have beauty and relationships. I'm like, I mean, it's a very poetic metaphor for looking at the solar system in this way. And we have, again, Libra is the domicile associated with the seventh house. So something interesting to look at when you look at your chart. And Venus in retrograde missed the illusion of what's happening in relationships, the illusion of beauty, of like, it may not seem like all as it seems, right? Or a facade, I think of with Venus in retrograde. And then also looking at, okay, Libra in the illusion type of way. How is Libra being maybe acting a bit two-faced or not standing in their truth, right? What's the illusion that Libra is holding together during a Venus retrograde? So that's another way to look at that. Then we have our our Mars again, mentioning the war, the action, the output. Scorpio is the domicile, and it's the 8th house that it loves to hang out in. That's kind of the ruler. And Mars, the illusion of Mars, during a retrograde. Like, oh, I thought this was an argument when it really wasn't, possibly, right? Here's the output that was needed, but it actually wasn't. And then also with Scorpio being all about transformation, and it's a water sign too. So, and it's fixed, thinking, oh, well, how is this an illusion of Scorpio when Mars is in retrograde? How is this maybe an illusion of transformation that is occurring for me? It feels like a real transformation. This is almost like non-consensual hypnosis. I think of Mars in retrograde. We then have a look at Jupiter. You see, I am biased with Jupiter because it is Sag in its domicile. Luck, expansion, and learning. So this could be Jupiter in retrograde. Maybe we're not learning. Maybe like what's being taught, like we're not vibing with, like there's something a little off, right? Jupiter in retrograde, things that were supposed to expand, or we had expectations, like Jupiter retrograde illusions. I think of, we had these expectations and they weren't met, or we had this agreement and it didn't match up, right? And I think the thing too with illusions, this is like choosing to believe the magician or to not, is like, do we want to break down the illusion that the magician is giving us and be like, I don't know, I didn't consent to this illusion, right? If we knew then the definition of Mercury retrograde as an illusion, then we can move through it easier. If we want to challenge it, which I'm here for some Mars action, we can challenge the illusions that are happening and say, hey, we had a contract, or hey, I thought you said this and this is how I interpreted this, or I'm not seeing you move in this direction, right? Like that kind of makes sense with that illusion, or ways to cope through a Mars retrograde. Or sorry, a Jupiter retrograde. I'm going back to my war. I think I'm just feeling very Marsy today. I don't know. It's the energy from post-COVID. So then we move up to Saturn here. Again, structure, time, discipline, course correction is another really great way to think about it with Saturn. And thinking of Capricorn. I love Capricorn because they're so reliable. They just get things done. It's great. And if we're thinking maybe like a Saturn retrograde situation, maybe a structure that you put into place, not working so well, needs to be reevaluated. A course correction that you thought or was maybe advised to you, right? And during a retrograde, you put it into practice. You're like, no, I was right the whole time, which is usually what happens with Saturn retrograde. It's like, oh, I gave my power away. Hold up. Because Saturn, father time, there's a lot of drama with Saturn. We'll get into like there's like drama with the sons and the like murder, and it's a whole thing. So Saturn they mean business. Saturn is like, you're back in your power, and we had the whole thing about this. So Saturn in retrograde would kind of be a full-on course correction, or taking back your power in that way. Because there was an illusion of, I thought I was on the right path because everybody else told me to do this. And it's like, I'm not everybody. I'm going this way. And then we have our kind of outer planets that aren't talked about as much, but I feel are very important, especially for the more creative, highly sensitive, psychic individuals, with Uranus being all about extremes, the outsider, breakthroughs, even breakdowns. And Aquarius is the domicile. They're all about revolution. They're about the collective. It's all about the 11th house. So that's very much community oriented, externalizing. And I mean, I love Uranus as a punk kid, you know, making zines. It's the way to go. So having a look at your Uranus would be really interesting of what parts may feel like outside, or an outsider, and bringing them in because they're needed. And Uranus in retrograde may look like going with the flow or going with the crowd, very much connected to Saturn, right, with structures and course correcting. But Uranus is like, oh, well, I need to hide that part of myself, or that part isn't, that one's too outsider, it's too weird. And Uranus is like the invitation out of retrograde to be like, oh no, this is who I am. I cannot, I get sick if I hide that part. It's usually what happens with Uranus retrograde. Some people may feel like really off, really icky during that time. And then we have Neptune. I love Neptune. The subconscious, dreams, art, psychic ability, Pisces in its domicile, going with the flow, right? Metaphysical, all about the 12th house, this life and the next. Very in tune, very understanding. Neptune in retrograde may look like extreme Capricorn energy, extreme earth, like I need to be practical, I need to like ground down, this is impractical, how dare I dream, right? Like that's the energy of a Neptune in retrograde, which again, retrograde being an illusion. We need all these planets, we need all these aspects of self to be present. We then have our final Pluto. So keeping Pluto, and I love Neil deGrasse Tyson, even though he kicked out Pluto from the planets. I still, astrologically, for the metaphor, we're keeping Pluto. Regeneration, transformation. This also has more with like a collective generational energy, and it's all about the 8th house. And Pluto also associated with there's more like ancient astrology and then kind of contemporary astrology that associates it with Scorpio as well, which makes complete sense with transformation, regeneration. Pluto retrograde, you're like there aren't like a stagnation that is felt, or like I've been doing all this work and I just feel stuck. And that may be the feeling or the illusion of Pluto. Like you still are showing up, you're still doing your spell work, you're still doing your meditations, you're still doing all that you need to do. It's happening, but the illusion is feeling like nothing's moving forward with the Pluto retrograde. So those are our planets. I'm going to catch up here with the chat. Danny, I always understand the effect as retrogrades appear to go backwards. Yes, their light hits us differently and therefore gives some potentially false lighting. Exactly. That's the breakdown. It's like we asked the magician, how does this trick work? The light is hitting differently. And Maria mentioned, Danny, I like that a lot. Retrogrades for me have always just been a time that the tides are rolling in rather than out. So going within ourselves. Absolutely. I love that. And then Mariah, Uranus goes retrograde the day of Numinous. Isn't that funny? I'm like, but of course. Be like, all right, everyone, let's challenge to bring out all of the full-on witch, the full-on archetypes that need to be unfurled during that time. Yeah, and we're in that Pluto retrograde right now. Yes. Like, oh, are we doing the work? We are doing the work. I love that. So we got through a little bit of retrogrades. We got familiar with the planets. Eclipses. We're in it right now with the eclipses. And this is my phrase that I think, Mariah, you would appreciate of eclipses are being cruel to be kind. Yeah. They're pattern breakers. I like to think of them as, the thing that we've been putting off for that intuitively we knew at a deep level. It's like, let's bring it up now and deal with it. Eclipses are like, let's look at that. They occur about 4 to 6 times per year, depending on what's going on. And then it's really, I like to think of it back, right? If we're looking at the sun and the moon, our vantage point, the earth, Sun is the truth maker, moon, the emotional kind of depth and intuition. The alignment of the moon and the sun shining a light on the truth of your calling, the truth of kind of who are you pulled forward to be in this lifetime, in tangent or in affinity with the emotional intuition, right? Because the moon is typically, we see it in front and then the light is coming behind, just like this image here at the top right corner. So we see like, whoa, there's this shadow there. There's like, but actually there's a whole ring of light around this. They're in alignment together and they are shining. The moon is in alignment with the emotional body of the truth of what is occurring. So we're seeing this kind of, again, another kind of visual illusion from our vantage point. But if we're thinking at it from an alignment perspective, it makes complete sense. Emotional and calling truth working together for us. And then if we're thinking about this from solar eclipse versus lunar eclipse, this also gives us a little bit of a different interpretation. Solar eclipses occur on the new moon, and new moon we know is hidden and it's dark from our vantage point. We don't see it. It's the seed underneath. It's like the time of rest typically, or the time of going into the underworld. And then the solar eclipse is coming up forward and it's like, oh, okay, here's the light on the path and some external action that wants to be made known to you. Like, here's the action that I want to be moving forward with in my calling. Doesn't mean we take that action right away during the eclipse because we're still in new moon time. New moon is just like, hey, rest, integrate this knowledge, understand, take it in. And then lunar eclipse happens on a full moon. So we do see the moon in the sky, but then the sun comes round and like, whoa, what is this? And sometimes it shows up as a red color, sometimes it's just like pink, like what is happening? And imagine in ancient societies when they saw that, they're like, it's the end of the world, right? If we're taking it from kind of, again, moon being emotional and sun being calling truth, this is the moon is like full on. So we're seeing the full spectrum of emotion that is in shadow and also the calling and the truth. So now what we're feeling with this Taurus eclipse season is the shadow aspects of self. There are these inner emotional things that we're like, oh, I maybe had a feeling about this, but now they've been amplified. They're making themselves known and you're like, oh, I didn't think I was jealous, or I didn't think I wasn't okay with that, but I'm actually not okay. Like the full range of emotions coming forward. And also to not limit those to like, oh, I'm just feeling emotional. Like, no, these are some very deep intuitive things that are revealing themselves. This is that, again, that saying of eclipses are being cruel to be kind. They see like where your calling is, where you're moving forward to, and it's like parsing away the untruths that want to be cleared away so we can move forward with eclipses. So eclipses are pretty magical. They are a lot. So be, gentle with yourself if you've noticed that you're like a full range of emotion is coming more, or like the big feels are more present than normal. We can say, hey, eclipses are present. They're drawing it out of us. And also like intuitively, collectively, everybody that I've been seeing as clients, they're like, I'm in a crisis. I am not well. I am feeling all the things. And I'm like, okay. So, and it's helpful for me, like, because, right, we could read all about this, but me working one-on-one with many people, I'm like, what's going on? So I have to check astrologically. I'm like, oh, okay. This is what's occurring. And myself as well, right? Like caught COVID, needed to sit with the feelings, needed to sit with something that I'm like, oh my God, okay, intuition, I hear you, right? So we're all collectively in it. There's nothing wrong with that. There's going to be seasons for that. So it's about 7:30. Let's double check the chat real quick. Do we want to do a little 2 to 3 minute bathroom water break take a break from the screen for a little bit, 2-3 minutes? Okay, cool. So it's 7:31 now. At 7:33, we'll continue. Yes, yes, totally, Mariah. I'll catch the replay. And actually, because class is, you guys can scoot. We'll catch you on the replay. We may kind of dig into this maybe in a separate class, but we'll do a little survey at 7:33, just because I didn't plan to go over 7:30 tonight. Bye. And I'm gonna refill my water as well, and we'll be back at 7:33.